Hello and welcome to the Revanchist podcast. My name is Jacob, Tilly, Teutonic, everything. That's practically all I am. That's all of my names. That makes up everything that I am. Connor.
That's it. Nothing else matters. That's all you need to know is Jay
Yeah.
Tectonic. Nothing else about his life.
Oh yeah, that's the most important aspect of my being, is Teutonic. We also have Connor here as well, if you'd like to say hello.
Hello. Oh, welcome to the second episode of the Revanchist podcast. Don't try pronounce it. Most of us can't. But thanks for tuning in.
And finally, we have Tom.
Good evening.
Right. Okay. Do we have anything to say as a prelude to getting down to business?
I hope you
let's get straight to it.
Hope you enjoy the show. Let's get straight in.
Okay. Right. Let's go. Okay. So this week we're going to be talking about university strikes that were happening across the country recently. We're also going to be on Trump Watch as well. Some updates on more sexual harassment scandals, etc., etc. Also,
the Trumpinator at it again.
Indeed,
at it again.
Indeed. And we're also going to be
madman.
looking at how a Nazi candidate ended up running for the GOP, and we're also going to be looking at Jordan Peterson, the great man himself. And
if none of that interests you, stick around to learn about Adolf Hitler's Death Star.
Don't give it all away. Don't give it all away. We've got plenty to talk about.
He's already given it away.
Yeah.
It's all right. They're already curious. They're hooked in on that alone.
Yeah, stop watching from now on.
They're not going to stop. They're hooked on that.
Okay, we left them with the trailer breadcrumbs. Now they just have to follow it. Right, let's begin then. Okay, so the first article we're looking at is from The Guardian. And they're addressing the university strikes, which could hit exams and graduation ceremonies. So I'll read it through, and feel free to stop me at any point if you have anything to say. Okay, so Connor is the main person when it coming to talk about this. He's the one who wanted to focus on this. So I'm guessing he's going to be leading the charge of the conversation. But right, let's get to it. So strike action by university lecturers, which is due to start this week, will be extended to disrupt summer examinations and graduation ceremonies if there is no resolution to a dispute over pensions. More than 1 million students in 65 universities across the UK will be affected by industrial action by members of the university and college union, which begins on Thursday with 14 days of strikes spread over 4 weeks. Connor, this has affected you, right?
Yes, this has affected me actually directly. The strike itself, even though we had 1 week that was reading week, it took over about 2 to 3 weeks of actual lectures and seminars that have basically been cancelled. We've been basically told, what we were told is the uni didn't even actually want to tell us, but the lecturers felt compelled that they had to give us some heads up for some preparation time. We were told that even though there wouldn't be lecturers, they'd basically have empty rooms for us all to go in and talk, which is obviously nowhere near the standard, that you want when discussing these things. We weren't even sure if the work would actually be available online to look at. Don't get me wrong, seminars obviously are useful, they work, but you need someone there to guide them. You need more incentive. It needs to be more structured. The lecturers were basically, a lot of them I felt had a great difficulty in the sense that 88% actually pushed for strike action, but you could see they were very troubled and concerned over how they would organize and structure these lessons, because everything obviously has to be moved around now, and they have to decide which things were more important, which things are less important, and obviously that jeopardizes your chances, well, especially mine actually, especially because one of my subjects is actually portfolio based, which is a complete nightmare because I have to talk about things that were discussed in workshops that no one's attended.
That's a bit of a problem.
So, obviously, I'll talk about it a bit more, but I think you should go on with the reading.
Okay. If employers refuse to return to the negotiating table with improved offers, The UCU has warned that its mandate for strike action is valid for 6 months, and it may decide to target exams, admissions, and graduations in order to press its members' case. Bloody hell. The scale of the strike action is unprecedented on British campuses, but such is the strength of feeling among members that the UCU says that it had to deploy extra staff to deal with a 5,000-strong surge in members since the strike ballot in October. The UCU General Secretary Sally Hunt said, "We are keeping the channels of communication open. There is no sign they intend to shift. There will be significant strike action from Thursday. It will be ongoing until we find a resolution." I haven't been affected quite so much by this. I'm in university as well, and I had one tutor who said that she was going to be going on the strike, and she linked me something to say, "You can support me here," but I wasn't really.
Has this article actually stated? It will do state why, but basically, as it says later, the reason for this strike is that the pension cuts will be 10,000, from what I understand, per year. They'll be worse off with their pensions.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, I don't think it says it in the article, but they have to rely on stock market movements, which in itself is absurd. A lot of lecturers, they go into this type of work for job security. Obviously, it's why else would you go into these high-paying jobs? You work hard, you study hard, you get into these good jobs, and you're then told your future's jeopardized, and you have to rely on the stock market of all things. Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know that's just like that could just fail at any moment. But then again, if it does fail at any moment, that means everyone's worse off. So, where were we? According to the UCU, undergraduates will be the hardest hit by strike action, losing an estimated 575,000 teaching hours, which will not be rescheduled. Institutions affected include some of the UK's most prestigious universities, including Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, Durham, Exeter, ICL, Warwick, and York. Lecturers are striking because they oppose changes to their pensions, which they say will leave a typical lecturer almost £10,000 worse off each year in retirement, or about £200,000 in total. That's a lot of money.
I think they have every right to be angry.
Yeah. I agree.
100%. I usually don't agree with this sort of thing, but no, I agree with that. They have every right to be angry.
Yeah.
So the main, obviously, if you read on, is the Universities UK, the UUK, and they do have a point. They do have a point that there is a deficit of 6.1 billion. There is an issue there.
That's the very next point.
And before, obviously, I just want to clarify. Obviously, I can appreciate that they need to save money. I can appreciate that fact. But it's so drastic, ill-advised, and poor judgment, in my opinion, to go after the pensions the way they have. I mean, what did they think was going to happen? What did they actually think, given that kind of... It's not even like it's a light, like, we'd be cutting it by so much. It's such a savage slashing of the pension scheme. And it's obviously a complete balls up at this point. It's a complete fuck up, isn't it? With this many going on strike. And I'm convinced, actually, because they are unwilling to budge as it currently stands, the UUK. I am convinced that we find out March 2nd whether this strike gets extended. And I'd like to say at this point, I actually phoned up the university to ask them, my university, what the contingency plan was in the event of the exams being directly affected by this strike. They informed me, obviously not to do anything suddenly, but at first they sort of buried their head in the sand, from what I could tell, and they were like, "Oh, what extension?" I'm like, "It's literally in every newspaper they're talking about it, including the Tab, which is the university newspaper that." So how can you not know about it at this point? And they talk about, from the way I understand it, having looked at various sources, I'll be looking at a small claims court and having to get my money back on this.
Yeah.
As yes, for loss. I mean, think about it. What am I paying for with uni? If it goes into the exams, we're talking 5 to 6 months I've paid for no lectures, no seminars, nothing. Not even exams I've paid for. I haven't received any of it. So what the hell am I paying for? It's like going into a shop and you buy, there's a 2-for-1 offer. You buy the 2-for-1 and it just, it's so infuriating. It's so infuriating.
I'll finish the article. Universities UK, which represents university employers, has proposed that in order to overcome the 6.1 billion deficit, as you said, in the university superannuation scheme, the fund should switch from a defined benefit scheme that gives a guaranteed retirement income to a riskier defined contribution plan where pension income is subject to stock market movements. That's silly, I think. A UUK spokesperson said the proposed pension changes were a necessary step made in the best interests of university staff to put the USS on a sustainable footing for the long term. UUK met with UCU over 35 times during the last year in an attempt to find a joint solution to address this deficit and the significant rise in future pension costs. Unfortunately, the only proposal put forward by UCU would have led to unaffordable contributions for employers and employees. Hunt said that Go on.
I've just got to add in, asking to put pensions on the stock market. Oh. You may as well ask them to take their pensions, go to a local casino, and bet it on black. What's the difference?
Yeah, I know.
What's the difference?
Better odds in the stock market.
Yeah.
The stock market is so volatile, especially as we're still heading into Brexit, man. You've got to keep that in mind. We're still... And we have no idea how the economy is going to look. No real clue. You know, we might be semi-optimistic, but it's so volatile at the moment, especially with how these EU deals are going to turn out. Things could plummet, they could rise, and they're asking these lecturers, they're asking people to commit and put their pensions in that. It's an absurdity. I can hardly express the words. It's utterly appalling, I think. They'd never ask it of anyone else. You'd never go into a high-powered corporation and ask, the CEO how he feels about that.
And students look as if they're getting, the brunt of it, because Hunt said that she did not want to have to go down the path of targeting exams, but the most sensitive time in the academic year, and added that she was devastated that the action would severely affect students, some of whom are planning to sue the university for compensation. Well, there we are. We have Conor Owen being written about in this particular...
I won't, as we have a later article as well, I'm not the only one who will be pursuing legal action in the event of my exams. There's 70,000 already, and I don't even think they're actually doing post-exam. They're just suing for the amount of lectures they've lost from what some have mentioned that. But interestingly, both sides are saying we should sue the other.
That'll work it well, I'm sure.
Well, I'm sure when it comes down to it, the solicitor will figure out who should be sued.
Yeah. But it is students caught in the crossfire here with, just...
utterly.
Exam season.
Yeah, it's inconsiderate on different sides.
Yeah, I know.
It's quite a complicated thing, this.
It's infuriating because I do feel like I am a pawn on a chessboard. Because on the one hand, it's like having a gun at my head. It's like a robber puts a gun at your head and he takes you into the bank and he says, listen, my family's starving, and if I don't rob this bank, they're all going to die. You sympathize with the robber. You do. And you think, fuck, this guy, he's looking out for his family. But then you're like, well, I got a gun to my head.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could take that. You could take
it's
that.
A good analogy, that is.
You could take that at both sides, because on the one hand, I do feel that I totally support the UCU. I don't know if it's the best analogy, because I do support the lectures. I think it's unreasonable of them. But I do feel that we've been, by both sides, forced into this chess game. And I think it's pretty sad. It is. We're not people so much as pieces on a board. Mm-hmm. And I think, when it comes to, because it's all down to money. And I think when it comes down to it, I do think that there's a strong possibility this strike will get extended. I don't think the UUK will try. I think they'll try hold out because they're pretty determined, especially if they've had over 35 times meeting in a year. That's telling. 35 meetings and they can't find a resolution is pretty telling, I think, that both sides aren't willing to budge.
Yeah. Should we flow this through into the next article?
Yeah, but obviously, do you two want to, where do you stand on the support? Who do you stand with?
It's really hard to say. Obviously, it doesn't directly affect me like it does you two.
Yeah. I suppose you got to go on the side of the teachers for me, the tutors.
I think it's just poorly planned though.
Yeah.
Poorly
executed.
Okay, if they wanted to strike and action is needed, then fair enough. I agree with that. But executed awfully.
Yeah.
At a bad time.
Yeah.
The worst timing ever.
Yeah, the worst timing ever.
Should have been September.
Surely these academics could afford. Again, I want to be sympathetic, but at the same time, you know what I mean. They could have been more considerate for the students as well.
I think. I mean, look, I can totally appreciate that they have a big deficit to sort out here. There is a real financial issue that needs to be addressed, but it's imbecilical to attack the pensions and then expect no repercussions. I think it's crazy. It's crazy. If you went after anyone's in a secure job, their pensions, and there'd be uproar.
You should, when you go into a job, you should expect that to stay safe. That more than anything.
I think, especially if you've worked hard to get in that position, which all these lecturers have, they've committed to this. They do a service to the government, and then they're being screwed over. And not just them, the students are indirectly, like me, have been screwed over. But on to the next one.
No one's going to come out well. All three parties are going to come out.
No, this is going to end, I think, in catastrophe. It's going to, I think. Let's move on. This has an extension, this topic, because it is
bonus.
the big one.
Okay. 70,000 students call for compensation over UCU lecturer strike. So you'd be in this boat. Almost 70,000 students have signed petitions demanding compensation for their universities in the run-up to the planned strike action by lecturers starting this Thursday, which threatens to bring disruption to campuses for weeks. The University and College Union, whose members voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action, had hoped university heads would return to the negotiating table, but they now say that strike action is inevitable. Students caught in what is becoming an increasingly acrimonious. There we are. It's a new word for me. Dispute are demanding their words be heard. Petitions have been launched at more than 30 universities calling for fees to be reimbursed for teaching hours lost. The number of signatures is rising at the rate of 10,000 a day.
My only question is with this again. It is the one is who is going to actually be sued here, because I don't actually want the trade unions to be. Yeah. I mean, this is the difficult position I'm going to be put in, because both sides are saying to sue the other, and the solicitor, obviously, whoever he falls down, or he or she, and says this is the side you need to sue to get obviously the best results. Obviously, that may end up falling on the side of the trade union that may need to be sued. And obviously, I don't think that would be fair, but I have to obviously think selfishly in this scenario and think about myself,
Yeah,
and I think
I'd do the same in your place.
I think it puts a very awkward position on the students, though, because where does the legality of this lie? Who is to be sued? Is it going to be the UK Universities Association? Is it going to be someone higher up? Is it going to be the trade unions? Who will be sued here? I don't know. I don't know. Go on.
Chris Ford, a professor of employment studies at Leeds University and a UCU member, is collecting the petitions. The volume of students that have signed up has gone to send a signal about the dissatisfaction within the situation. I hope that would at least make the parties consider coming back to the table. None of the students are explicitly critical of the stance taken by lecturers. The students seem to be taking it up with their universities. They want their fees compensated and they want them to get back to the negotiating table.
I gotta just quickly add in that I'm not even sure that due to the actual size of this deficit, even the threat of this many students suing, I'm not sure that it would scratch near the deficit.
How many of these students would actually sue, though?
Rising by 10,000
that's again.
A day, it said.
They wouldn't. They wouldn't. They just.
How many will actually, when it comes down to brass tacks, pursue legal? I would, because I really couldn't afford to be paying for something, especially for something I haven't fucking got. That in itself is a sick joke.
Might find that the tutors as well, feeling somewhat responsible for the students missing out, will push the students to say, look, just take legal action as a sorry kind of thing.
Yeah. There is one other issue again that was brought. I don't know if this article, I don't think it mentions it, but obviously the issue is, will we get our degrees? Will we get our degrees at the end? That's the whole point of university, obviously. Mm-hmm. And the way I understand it is that I'd have to obviously look up the actual code on what the policy of the universities is. But from what I've read so far, the exams may be pushed back, but I think far more likely, like in the event of, say, a student getting into a car crash on his exam day or something like that, they will look at past coursework and they will work out like an estimate. Yeah. And I feel that that's what they may do just on a mass scale and just give you, this is your estimate score. And that's fine. We'll get our degrees, but will they be as respectable in that form? Because when we have to explain that, if anyone asks, and they want to know what happened with the exams, are these degrees going to be or are they going to look at Cardiff University and just sort of go, well, did they really get it?
Yeah.
And I think that's a terrible shame, because so many of us have worked so hard to get to this point, I think, to be screwed over, essentially.
Right, last bit now. The UCU estimates that 1 million students will be affected by strike action with a loss of 575,000 teaching hours. This will not be rescheduled. It's the same thing we said. While many students sympathise with the lecturers' predicaments, there is growing frustration among those who are likely to be most severely affected by the strikes that will last for 14 days initially, with the possibility of further action during summer final exams. Oh, it's got another half of the essay, the article, sorry. Go on.
I was going to say, just skip through it to find anything interesting. I think there's a lot of it we've covered. A lot of it we have, I think, now.
One Sussex University student who's demanded compensation said, I'm a third-year student in his last term of university. That's pretty poor writing. And the fact that my Vice-Chancellor has told me that I would be without assistance for the whole 14 days over 4 weeks in my most important term of education is a joke. Lecturers are taking strike action because they oppose proposed changes to their pensions, which will say that will leave a typical lecturer 10,000 worse off. Da-de-da.
Yeah. Pretty much the most important thing to keep an eye on is it says, third paragraph at the end, we will be meeting on March 2nd to consider what wave 2 of the action may need to involve, and nothing is off the table. And there we go. I don't know. I think, does anyone want to add anything to this? Because I've obviously voiced my opinions. They are biased for obvious reasons that I'm personally invested in this.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't affected me as much. But yeah, go on.
When Jacob was reading the original article and you read that word wrong, put a smile on my face, that did. I love when you get things wrong.
What word was it again? Acrimonious.
Acrimonious, yeah. You ought to be suing the lecturers that can't even let you read, like.
University of Three, there's no way.
But yeah, it's a pretty grim subject, I think. It's pretty grim at the moment. I know a lot of them are out picketing. A lot of my lecturers are. I find it funny, though, that the university I'm at is trying to bury its head in the sand.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are trying to, like, really bury their head. And I think that they'll all blow over. And, well, there we go. That's it, really.
So, next story, is it?
Aye, okay.
Yeah, let's move on. We
got the Trump one?
The Trumpinator, the Trump man himself. The madman did it again.
So,
Trump,
Trump
in Twitter.
Read it brief it, Tilly?
Sure. So, Trump in Twitter spat with woman who accused him of sexual harassment. Rachel Crooks has urged US President to release security footage of an encounter she says they had in Trump Tower in 2006.
Before we start, and before you read more, do you think this happened, yes or no?
Probably. I do think with Trump, he seems like the kind of guy who would, like, be a randy bugger with some women. I can sympathize with a man who likes his women.
What do you reckon, Tilly?
I don't know. I mean, there's been so many scandals. It's like, are all of them true or all of them false? It's one or the other.
Well,
with a few.
Surely one has to be.
Let's read on a bit, and then we'll discuss more the Trump presidency.
The US president has engaged in a Twitter fight with a woman who has accused him of forcibly kissing her when she worked at Trump Tower in 2006. Rachel Crooks' allegations against Donald Trump have been reported before, but it was her appearance on the front page of the Washington Post on Tuesday in an article headlined, "Is anyone listening?" This Trump accuser keeps asking herself that, but she plans to keep talking about that day in 2006 that offended the president. Responding to the article, Trump used Twitter to dismiss Crooks as a woman I don't know and, to the best of my knowledge, have never met. As you do.
I don't know her. I never met her.
He went on to describe the report as fake news and claimed that the kiss never happened.
Fake news, guys. It did happen. Fake news.
He should have claimed he'd never met any woman in his entire life.
I only have my wife. It's the only woman.
My third wife.
In all seriousness, though, in all seriousness, with the presidency, affairs are certainly nothing new.
No.
I don't really hold affairs. I don't really judge politicians based on their private sex lives. I have no interest, unless they're obviously breaking the law.
This is considered harassment. Yeah.
Oh yeah, in this case, I remember there was a different version of this story where apparently didn't she walk out on them having sex, or is this a different? Because there was another one with a maid in a hallway or something. Was another one.
Okay.
I imagine so. There's about 100 of them.
Yeah. But what do you think? Did the captain have grab him by the pussy? Did he go too far and kiss the woman?
Did he go too far?
I think this probably did happen, but wasn't as bad as she's making out. That's the way I see it. And I guarantee that if he never ran for president, she wouldn't have bothered coming out about it, and she didn't care.
It said that she'd said it before. She mentioned that she'd already made the accusation, but yeah, you just see it. It's just the surge has been since he's become president, because it's just political pawns, really, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Hang on, didn't it say somewhere down here she's involved in the Democrat Party in some way?
Well, yes, it says that.
Read on, shall we?
Yeah, read on. Yeah. Carry on.
He went on to describe the report as fake news. Who would do this in a public space with live security cameras running? The president asked. Crooks responded by urging Trump to release the security tape from Trump Tower. Please, by all means, share the footage from the hallway outside the 24th floor residential elevator bank on the morning of January the 11th, 2006. Let's clear this up for everyone, she wrote. She later told CNN, I would think as our president, he would have more important things to do than to tweet me and try to discredit my story. I know what's true. He knows what's true, and I think he should be afraid of that. Trump has...
Surely 12 years on, that footage would no longer exist.
That footage is long fucking
Surely
gone.
to God.
And even if
years.
even if it wasn't, Trump would just be on the phone like, burn the tape, and then just say, you know what, the footage is gone. The footage, we just lost it. I'm really sorry. Just behind him.
Why would he have more important things to do than claim he's not a rapist? Sexual harassment.
Yeah, that's probably quite high on the list of priorities if you're going to be accused of that.
In fairness, he's not accused of being a rapist.
Not rape, no. Well, not in this story anyway. Not in this story.
He's accused of inappropriate behavior, which isn't out of his character.
I'll agree with that.
I wouldn't say imagine that Trump was a rapist. I couldn't see him doing that. I don't think that's the type of person he is. I do think that he's someone who would do inappropriate behavior. I think he's the kind. It's Trump. Yeah. I think that's his character.
I think just powerful men have a problem with that. Goes to their head, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He has been a billionaire for years. Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me.
Trying to affect your mental attitude and God complex sort of thing. Well, I mean, obviously he's narcissistic. Obviously, everyone knows that. He's an arrogant guy, like.
So, as a wider scope here, obviously leading out from this, what's everyone's opinions on Trump? What does everyone think? How do you think his presidency's going?
I think it's been great.
You think it's been great? Really?
I love the guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's made America great again. It's only just been over a year. It's amazing.
What are you?
You're laughing.
Where's your thing on it, Till?
I'm pro-Trump to the extent that he does something good, and I agree with. I'm in support of him, and then I'm anti-Trump to the extent that I do something wrong. So I disagree with him, which is pretty much the same with every person who's ever lived.
Every single human on Earth.
Yeah. But I'll give some examples, right? So one thing that I was really happy with was the black community's unemployment level reaching an all-time low, which I think that's awesome. And you heard when he did his State of the Union address, you could just see the worst was the Democratic Black Caucus, I think it was, when Trump stated that they all just sat down and didn't say a word. Like they just cannot accept the dysphoria of the fact that Trump has lowered the black unemployment rates, and it was a Republican. They'd rather
ignore that for a mean tweet, which means nothing basically.
Yeah, exactly. But then at the same time, I'm against him to the extent. Remember back right at the start of his candidacy when he launched a missile into a Syrian airbase? That was just stupid.
We don't know the full story there, do we? We're not informed by CIA, FBI, are we? Like, we don't know what happened there.
Within my opinions of...
He knows more than us about that chemical attack in Syria.
Yeah. Within my opinions of Trump, I wouldn't say I liked Trump. I would say I had a curiosity towards him. I think obviously I wanted him to have a fair whack at the presidency stick. I think it would only be fair. He won, and he won fairly. Yeah. Obviously.
On the night of the presidency, I had no opinion whatsoever. Like, I was just completely.
I watched it all night. I followed it all night. I stayed up all night.
I believe that Trump. I think he's a disappointment, though. Overall, I have to think he's.
Why? Why are you saying this?
Why?
What do you expect? In 2017, 2.1 million more jobs were added. Unemployment down 4.1%, 17-year low. Stock market, I know it's dropped slightly now, but it hit record highs.
Okay, but
what do you want me to do? Everyone just be rich?
Okay, well, the stock market would have gone up regardless at this point. It would have gone up regardless. Okay, well, the stock market is incredibly subject to change, and I don't think Trump had that direct an impact on this stock market. But I do think that Trump also promised, his central campaign promise was to clear out the swamp. He wanted to get rid of the corruption. That was the big selling point. So what does he do? He fills his cabinet with yes men. He becomes king of the swamp. And that to me was the most unimpressive thing. I thought he is a guy who promised, because he was meant to be the polar opposite to the Democrats in the sense of, he was saying, look at this corruption, look at it all. I'm going to get rid of all of it. We're going to clear out the swamp. His words. And he hasn't. He's failed to deliver on that. I find as well, the other issue, obviously, I still wonder why pursue the wall. What's the point of pursuing the wall at this point? When they argued at first, because it's a waste of money. It's a total waste of money.
The Mexicans are going to pay for it.
They're never gonna. Even they're never gonna pay for it. Come on.
He obviously means by tariffs on goods. Tariffs, he doesn't mean he's gonna rob the Mexican government.
No, he means but I mean, they're not going to do that. It's not going to work.
Oh no, they absolutely rely on America for import and export. They will do that.
Even the maintenance of the wall will go into millions. The maintenance of the wall.
Maintaining a bloody wall.
Yes,
it won't cost.
Yes, it will, for the size of it. The sheer size of
pay
this
for that as well.
Mexico are not paying for this thing. Mexico will not pay for it. There's no way. Mexico couldn't even afford it.
The cartels are going to pay for it.
The cartels are just going to sneak their drugs in by the miles of unprotected coastline, fly their drugs in, because they know airport security is mostly just there to make the passengers feel safe. It's
Build a giant ocean wall instead.
It'd be like, have you ever escaped from New York and they just build a giant wall around the city? That's the future of America. It's just a wall going all the way around.
30,000 feet high so planes can't fly over there.
Yeah.
Genius.
No, I mean, at first I thought the wall is just, I thought he meant symbolically.
I thought he meant symbolically at first, to be honest with you.
But to actually pursue it, I thought is dogmatic, and I think it's just nonsense. It's just a waste of money. It's not going to prevent the drugs. It's not going to prevent the immigration.
It'll obviously help.
The issue is the coastline. It's always going to be the coastline. That's how most of all they do is they pay, $5 to some guy, Miguel. Miguel takes them out, miles into the unprotected coastline. They jump off. They swim to the shore. Because, of course, they will.
I think it's a pretty obvious solution here. We need to assassinate Miguel and steal his money. And use that money to build the wall.
Just sink his boat. They just see all these loads of illegal immigrant boats coming in.
Anyway, we're getting off topic with the wall. Trump's presidency's been successful in the year he's had.
I've got to disagree. I don't think Trump's had.
Surely the main role of a president is to get unemployment down and help the economy, help people, and that's what he's done.
But how much? But has he really done that, or are these just things that were
jobs in rural zones?
Because he's also implemented. He's implemented the disaster that is Trump Care, which is clearly inferior to Obamacare. It actually reaches less people.
Yeah, but that depends on your opinion, doesn't it? Healthcare is not right.
Well, I mean, most people would agree that a good nation wants an adequate healthcare that's at least affordable for the average person. I think that
it's affordable for the average person.
Yeah, well, it's clearly not. There are plenty who it's not enough for. The Trump Care is just inadequate. They need to. Well, I mean, it's not.
I've done my own research, and if I worked it out. If you earn $22,000 a year, or 24, I believe it was, something like this, that you'd save money in America with health insurance rather than taxes to the NHS.
There are charities that are going to some of the poorest states in America. Charities that are actually going into these places because the medical care is that inadequate, and these people simply cannot afford it.
The US medical care is higher than better than UK care, though. You never hear about people from US coming from operations in the UK.
It doesn't matter if it's higher care. If you can't afford it, who cares? Hey, I've got a cure. I've got a cure here.
What are you supposed to do, though? At the end of the day, you can't just give healthcare for free or affordable.
I know.
The doctor wants to make a wage. It's one of the hardest professions to get into. So you can't demand the doctor takes a pay cut.
I'm not saying, an unreasonable demands. I'm saying that it needs to be affordable. And in its current incarnation, it is simply not affordable for the majority of people. It simply isn't.
It is. That's a lie. So over 50% of Americans don't have health care?
50%. Where are you getting your statistics? It's simply not. It simply is not.
You said to me most Americans, but obviously over 50%. Well, over 50% don't. That's ridiculous.
It's simply inefficient. It's well known that it's not as good as Obamacare. It's been well documented at this point.
It's completely based on opinion.
Well, do you want me to get up statistics? I wasn't expecting to.
So what would you rather? NHS or American healthcare?
What would I rather? The NHS or American healthcare? I'll take the NHS.
Well, where you go to hospital, they can't even give you a pillow. And I've witnessed that myself numerous occasions.
I've seen through the NHS system. I went through it when my dad was ill. I went through it. I understand that it's under severe pressure, but it's under pressure for other reasons. It's under pressure for other reasons, the NHS. Because...
It's under pressure from lack of funding.
Yes, lack of funding.
So
it's very different.
And everyone gets better healthcare then?
There's a reasonable amount, I think, that privatization, I think, is acceptable. And I think Trump Care... I think Trump Care, though, has gone too far into... It's something far more that it's just not for the average person. It's not reasonable, I think, a lot of it. And I would argue that... Well, I've jumbled my words now.
I feel it's good to get a mixture of both healthcares. I think accessibility to both is fundamentally key, because in the UK the NHS is a bit of a sacred cow and you can't really say anything out unless you get struck down. So
considered evil.
Yeah, exactly. But part of me feels that if private healthcare is available and you could pay for it, then what the hell is stopping a country from having private healthcare as well as having a nationalised healthcare? But if you've got more private support, it means that in areas where nationalised healthcare is not quite so fundamentally required, they can withdraw it and then have that being subsidised by privatised healthcare systems.
But then people will get angry, wouldn't they? Because some people are paying for it, some people aren't.
True.
And that's not fair.
But part of what I was thinking, I'll tell you what I was thinking about healthcare, right? So I've just addressed the idea of having a mixed kind of healthcare system. So part of me was wondering whether having a private healthcare system for incidents where people require healthcare, but it was through a fault of their own, that would be privatized healthcare. So say, for example, if somebody has throat cancer from smoking cigarettes for 50 years, they'd go. I don't think it'd even need to be that far. I think you could just say someone that got pissed on a night out. Ended up in hospital paralytic. That as well.
Not. It wouldn't even have to be long term. Like someone, getting pissed, having a fight, or alcohol poisoning for the night. Like that's a joke. So
paying for the repercussions.
Why should I have to pay for some guys getting pissed?
So paying for the repercussions of their own actions, it incentivizes it less in the future, and it also means that when people are actually doing it, they're making money off of their mistakes, and they won't do it again anyway. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And
I mean, they obviously will, but less so.
Yeah. So that would be the idea for privatized healthcare. And then for nationalised healthcare through no fault of their own. So, for example, someone gets in a car crash, somebody has brain tumour, that would be nationalised healthcare, because that's something that people would pitch in for, because this person has been in a scenario where
for a controversial topic,
it's
for a
very much
sort of injury. Would that go to the courts then to decide whether it was self-inflicted or not?
You'd have to find some kind of line of measuring,
like a health board, court, something like that.
See, that's just an idea that I've been thinking of.
And then obviously some would slip through the cracks, but that's the same with every system. So
I've got a thing here, and looking at it,
idea. Thank you.
I've got a small thing here, and looking on it, as it says, is that Trump Care itself isn't actually that different to Obamacare. But there's a few minor things. I'll just read out the little bit here for everyone. Just very quick. It's something small. It's not the whole thing we want to read, obviously, but it's from Reason. It's just reason.com if you want to know the site. The House bill, for instance, replaces Obamacare subsidies with refundable tax credits. I mean, the government would still pay people to buy insurance, though it wouldn't require people to get insured. It does impose a penalty for dropping coverage that amounts to the same thing. The Senate bill in the words of Reason's Peter Sutherland, is just Obamacare, but less of it. Like the House bill, it requires that insurers accept all applicants regardless of pre-existing conditions and limit their ability to charge more for sicker patients. And it authorizes payments to insurers to cover losses imposed by price controls. The real problem with both bills is that neither challenge Obamacare's central premise, which is that the federal government should micromanage medical insurance markets. So, any comments on that?
Just Obamacare, but just less of it.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. It's just less of it.
How about this? What if you took into account that all the Trump voters, not all of them, but let's just say for the sake of argument, the Trump voters didn't like Obamacare, they'd rather Trump's system, then shouldn't the will of the people be carried out?
Sure, but are the people fully aware of what they're doing? I mean, it's the same in the same way. It's not anyone's
place to say that. It's not anyone's place to say that, though.
Well, I think they should be aware, though, of obviously if they want to seek out.
Aware someone is or something.
Well, I mean, if their government is going to offer them a worse deal that's not as sufficient or good, they should be aware that the deal that they're getting into.
The conclusion is Trump supporters are idiots.
The conclusion is why would you agree to a deal that was worse? Why would anyone?
Because they think it's better, and opinions.
Well,
should the will of the people be carried out? Should the will of the people be carried out?
You act as if the will of the people was something that was central in this decision. It was the will of Congress.
No, come on now. The Republicans genuinely dislike Obamacare. That includes the voters. That's a popular conservative suggestion in America. Healthcare is much bigger in America than here, like in terms of debate. Everyone here just saw the NHS at the end of the day. Is Jacob said conservative or not? You can't criticize the NHS. They have different ways of fixing it.
It's their decision to go for a less good deal, but I mean it's like choosing between shooting yourself in the foot or just cutting the whole foot off. The one, I'll admit Obamacare had its problems. It certainly had its problems, but cutting your foot off is an even worse thing to do than shooting it.
I'll disagree.
You disagree? just hack the foot off and you get to look up.
If it could be surgically removed.
All right, I wasn't taking it that far, but you just cut it off. The one advantage is that if you cut your foot off, you get to throw it at your enemies. You always need to see a positive.
You get to throw it at a Trump supporter.
There is one issue I'm divided on. There is one issue, it's a recent one with Trump. There's two little ones. There's a minor one as well. I don't like the fact that he's brought up the video games and violence link back with school shooters. That shit has been talked to death, and it was done in the 90s. Yeah, that's out.
You know what? I'm starting to think there's a point there.
No, I don't think so as much. I think it's a moot point because
maybe music a bit more.
Music a bit. I mean, this argument goes back to the 80s, 90s.
I don't think it's the main deciding factor. Obviously, it could help contribute slightly.
I mean, but if these people are that impressionable, keep in mind, I'd like to give a little example.
Yeah.
Is that obviously we're talking about extreme violent things motivate these people. But these people are unhinged in a way that they can misconstrue anything. John Lennon, obviously the lead singer of the Beatles, the man who killed him was inspired by the book The Catcher in the Rye. And if you read The Catcher in the Rye, it is a dribbly book, but all it's all about, or talks about, is how society's fake and he'd rather, just piss about and life sucks, and he gets the shit kicked out of him at one point. But it's nothing. It's a book of nothing. It really is. And he misconstrued that and went off and killed John Lennon. So I feel that these people, I
always thought the story was he was a massive fan and wanted to be associated with him.
No, it was he claimed it was on the Catcher in the Rye. He used that as his excuse. And another person who used it as an excuse was Ted Bundy, who claimed movies motivated him to rape and kill.
Do you think on a level it does desensitize people though?
Yes, I think there's issues with the media.
I'm obviously not saying video games or movies or music turns people into this, but people with those tendencies might be aggravated more. That's what I'd say. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Obviously, violence has always been around. Violence has been around since people were living in caves. Yeah. But these unhinged people will seek inspiration from movies, music, television, games, whatever.
The two things I would say is that first, obviously, on dealing with that, I would fight anything that wanted to censor art, anything that I would be completely opposed to, even if it's vile. Even if it's vile, if it's got something to say, I think it has a right, I think, to be there. A terrible film, well, I say terrible, is a film I saw recently. It was a real grindhouse film now, called Cannibal Holocaust. And it was a big film in
kill real animals, don't they?
1980, and it's a really difficult film to watch. Really difficult, very grotesque. The director himself got arrested because they thought the murders were real. There was violent rape. But the film makes a point about media and the news, and it's actually at a level it's intelligent. And I don't believe that should be banned.
It's a bit of a cult classic, that film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I recognize it.
It's a very disturbing film.
I've read about it, so surprisingly never watched it. I've watched all the classics of cult horrors, if you'd call it horror.
It's a very disturbing film, and it's uncomfortable because it's
I remember reading or watching. I don't know if this is true, but the director paid the actors afterwards to sort of disappear for a bit, so it was like they were actually dead. And then when he was arrested, he had to prove that they were alive, and it was just a film.
I'm thinking for a future.
He wanted it to look more real, basically. So he paid him a bit more to disappear.
I'm thinking for maybe one day, is that instead of looking at the news, we may do an exploration of the history of horror films and how horror's changed.
I'd enjoy that. Yeah, I'd enjoy.
I think that'd be an interesting change of pace, because we don't maybe just want to always talk and discuss politics. All this shit. But the other thing, as an aside as well, regarding obviously video games and violence and movies, is that we only really see, the level of violence in America is sort of unprecedented. And what we see across the board, say in Japan, use Japan as an example, their society is so organized and I would argue more efficient in many ways. Yeah. They have access to even more controversial things, way more. And we see nowhere near the level of violence and things that America does. I think it's inherent in the society that there's fundamental issues. It's not just. I think it's quite easy to be like, well, the games are doing or the films are doing it. Yeah, there's issues beneath the surface. Yeah. A lot more. So, that's the one thing I take issue with Trump on again. That's the latest. The other thing, I don't say I'm mixed on it. I'd say I'm very mixed. Is in light of the school shootings and obviously the NRA statements that followed, which I found were I just thought they were absurd reiterations and prancing on about the bloody Second Amendment and yada yada, just nonsense, really, the same shit. He proposes, and I will give it credit, at least he's proposing something. He wants to push for arming the teachers, essentially. Mm-hmm. And my opinion on it is mixed.
Let me. Can I pose a question to you real quick? It's on topic.
Yes, sure.
Do you think law enforcement in America should have guns?
Yes.
So, if there's a school shooting, should they call law enforcement? Because even if they ban guns, it's still obviously be the odd school shooting, right? So what you do then is call someone with a gun, which takes 5 minutes.
The difference is
if a teacher has a gun, then they'll be right there.
The difference is, I think, there is that police are trained to handle
well, then
this.
Train them. Well, then train them. Train the teachers.
It's different in the sense, that if you arm these teachers and this kid comes in, he starts shooting, okay? Mm-hmm. Even if they're trained, are these teachers really going to be emotionally prepared to kill someone? It's very different. It's very different. There has been
cases of shooters being stopped, one by a head teacher, I believe.
Yes, some of the stops I've seen mostly, there was a security guard who tackled one of the shooters. And I mean, tackling is very different than killing. It takes a certain kind of mentality you have to be in or be prepared for. If they hesitate, the teachers, a shooter will not hesitate.
But at the like you always see brave people like in this recent one, that coach try and tackle the shooter. It takes a lot more bravery to tackle someone than pull a trigger. In the heat of the moment, you're pulling the trigger. I reckon you'd be surprised what people are doing in the heat of the moment. More so.
Maybe.
Pulling the triggers, like stabbing someone or hitting someone over the head, that's personal. But to pull a trigger when you're scared, you don't think I'm killing someone. You just think. You don't think. You just think bang.
But the alternative is they may not. They may have the opposite, and they may just totally freeze. And the thing is, if they freeze for just 1 second too long, that's it. Because the shooter's unhinged.
How do you know the shooter is a good trained shooter?
He doesn't have to be if he's got a semi-automatic in a close space classroom. He's just got to pull the trigger and mow him down. You don't need to be a good shot with close range semi-automatic. Spray and pay, man. But the other issue is that obviously I have wondered whether, given that kids can be little shit sometimes, they can be very I shouldn't say that, but they can be trying, shall we say. And I wonder if
you think there's going to be one case where a teacher's just going to pad. I've had enough of this student. I've had enough of little Jimmy in the back row.
He just pulls the Magnum drawer out and he whips out the Magnum and he's like, "If you fail one more fucking time, Billy, if you fuck up one more time."
A possibility.
But I don't know. I think
this. I mean, the opportunity is put there, right there in front of them. So, if some unhinged supply teacher comes in,
I love how they how different people use the examples of Japan society. Because on one hand, you have the left talking about the guns and lack of violence and lack of shootings. And on the other hand, you have Richard Spencer talking about how it's an ethno state and how it's worked that way.
Oh yeah.
Japan. Everyone just wants to be Japan. That's pretty much it. I mean, Japan's a very complicated. I think Japan's unique, but it has different issues. Japan's main issue is suicide, actually. They got an aging state.
As displayed by Logan Paul.
Yeah. Logan Paul. He gave a first-hand account showing us how suicide was an issue.
This is the man that we all need.
What a hero!
Covering the real news stories.
Integral reporting, real integrity and class.
From the scene.
He tasered. Have you heard he tasered the rat?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, and now Logan Paul's lessons. That was a biology lesson for us all. You should have just been see how the nerves react when I apply an electric shock.
The man's an unhinged psychopath.
Okay.
You know what? I kind of like him.
You would.
Typically you to like him, yeah.
I only watched one video. It was the other day. I think it was on like most trending on YouTube, and I think he was fucking filming for some fucking like UFC movie or something. And he just started dabbing loads, and he was like fucking thinking like, who is this great guy?
Balls of steel.
I'm gonna head back. I'm gonna be back in 1 sec, but then we're gonna take a look at the Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Cool.
How did the Nazi and the GOP party first?
Oh, we doing the? Yeah, I missed. I've gone. Yeah, I got it. We're back in a sec.
So okay. Cool.
Okay.
So what have we got left here, Jake?
We got
Nazi GOP.
How did a Nazi end up?
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson, and then we've got.
And then the last one, yeah, the Death Star.
That one, yeah, that one. Don't tell Yeah, that's the last one. Saving up for last. But so have you been?
What's that?
Have you been? Not bad. I'll tell you what. I watched The Shining the other day. I ended up watching The Shining.
What do you think?
It's not my favourite movie like it is yours. I thought it
is my number one favourite film of all time.
I thought it was a good film. I thought it was definitely a good film.
But it wasn't the first time I watched it, mind. It took about 10 times till I realise it. Maybe more till I realised it's my favourite film of all time. But how do you see it? How do you interpret what's happening in the film? Is Jack insane?
Oh, The Shining we're talking about.
Yeah, just a little brief intermission.
Oh man, I love The Shining. What a film.
See, it's my favourite film of all time. But as I said to Jacob, it took me about 10 times watching it to realise. I always liked it, but then I realised, wow, this is special.
He's a brilliant. It's definitely one of the best horror films. I feel like definitely one of the best. For me, it's just
because I've never seen a film change so much every time I've watched it. So Jacob, do you think he's insane?
Yeah.
What's your opinion? That's what I thought the first time, and things just change my mind every time. The big question always asked is, how does he get out of the freezer when it's locked?
Yeah.
And how does he get out?
I always like the question at the end, did he get absorbed into the hotel at the end? That was one for you. Was he always there? Was he never there? Was the hotel even real?
Was he never there? Yeah.
But all right.
So many things you can ask there.
I'm sure we'll have to. Yeah, I'm definitely think we should go into a horror app one day. Just discuss horror films.
Yeah.
The future of horror. Week. Yeah, maybe next week's app. Make a nice something interesting. Show where keep it fresh to the show.
Okay.
But let's move on
probably about
to
halfway through now, I reckon.
To Nazis.
Everyone's favourite. How did a Nazi end up standing unopposed for Congress nomination in Illinois? And this isn't just like a classic, typical, everyone who's a Republican's a Nazi. This is
not a classic. I hate Jews Nazi.
He was a
proper
Nazi. He is actually a white supremacist and former member of the American Nazi Party. This guy is an actual ex-neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a small vid.
Oh yes, yeah.
Do you want to we'll play it now and watch it? It's only 46 seconds. Just watch it through.
You can have your own conspiracy theories, but you can't have your own facts.
Not conspiracy theories. The fact that Jews controlled basically the country,
Jews
the
were
Congress,
killed.
the economy,
Adolf
the
Hitler
media.
perpetrated a genocide. The Auschwitz death camp existed, and the Nuremberg trial happened. Those are the facts, sir. Either way, here's the larger point.
It's a scam.
Fine, you're on the record. You've said that you don't believe the Holocaust.
Forged records of Holocaust survivors are getting special Social Security benefits.
I'm glad that you're pinning all of your position and platform on that piece of paper. Arthur Jones, we heard your opinion, and we'll see what happens. Chances are you'll go down in flames.
Okay.
Okay, has everyone seen it, the vid?
I've seen it. Crazy man.
Okay. How can anyone deny the Holocaust happened at this point? There's way too much evidence to show it happened. The camps themselves, you can still go to. The remains, the soldiers who visited on the liberation, who found the dead bodies, the family members affected. It's not even even if you ignore all that and you say all the active survivors, they're just paid, there is documentation from the Nazis themselves. There is Nazis who have openly talked about what they did at the camps. It's insane to deny it. It's insane to deny it.
They all are indeed CIA plants.
That seems a distinct possibility.
The greatest fake news story ever.
It's mental illness to deny it.
Yeah, it is at this. I've heard people who argue like the moon landings were fake, and you hear a lot of the conspiracy theories, and you just sort of roll your eyes a bit. But they've at least got, some of them. You think at least they've got a semblance of reality to them. To me, to deny the Holocaust is just pure insanity. It's insane. But yeah, this guy's a Holocaust denier.
I guess what's his reasoning? Does he think like the Jews wanted special treatment, so pretended? Is that his reasoning or something?
He mentioned.
Shall I read
it? Oh, I haven't read the article yet. I just watched the video.
Okay.
I don't think it will say his specific reasoning, but in the video he said basically, if you listen for the one bit, like he mentioned forged documents, and I mean maybe there actually was a scam artist who probably maybe did want to try and exploit the situation. It wouldn't surprise me if there was someone trying to take it.
I saw somewhere once that someone was arguing that although it did happen, there wasn't even 6 million Jews in Europe at the time.
I mean, it wasn't
absolute bullshit to me. I have no idea.
I mean, the thing about it is that it didn't just the Nazi death camps also composed of disabled people, homosexuals, political enemies, gypsies. It was an assortment. I mean, Jews were the priority, but they got rid of lots of people.
Anyone who was inferior, not Aryan.
An interesting little fact, because my Asperger's, I would have been either shot dead in the hospital, like most of them were, or I would have basically been forced into a sort of forced slavery, where I would have basically been forced to become a code breaker for them. That was.
Why wouldn't you just say I'm not? Why wouldn't you just say I'm not autistic?
No, they knew because they would approach. They knew into these hospitals. They brought people in with autism, and they basically killed loads of them. But
say you were born in the 30s or 40s, they wouldn't have diagnosed you with Asperger's, would they?
No, the guy who actually it was named after, Dr. Asperger. He argued at the time.
Unlucky name.
Yeah, it is. It is. I know.
Only in hindsight. At the time, I know.
Right. He did. he argued. He argued that one of the advantages of Asperger's syndrome was the ability to see patterns, and that's actually how he saved a lot of his patients' lives, because the Nazis agreed to spare them so that they could code break for the Nazi regime. So there's some interesting little trivia of history for you.
I reckon you would have survived. They just want to diagnose you with it.
No, I can't. My patterns, I couldn't do maths for shit. I'd bullshit my way through. Genius. I'd bullshit.
That'd be
my solution.
It'd be like people like me and Tom as well that you'd be going up against as well. We'd be the ones you'd be trying to fool. We're both pretty Aryan.
You just see he just turns to you, Tom, and he's like, what do you think of him then?
He's just like,
who is
you?
Why are you talking about me as if I'm not here? What do you mean?
So how has this guy actually got in then to the race? Speaking of, how has he actually got?
Let's actually read it, shall we?
Go ahead.
How does Arthur Jones, a white supremacist and former member of the American Nazi Party, have any chance at a career in politics? I'm not sure, but he's set to take the GOP nomination for the 3rd Congressional District of Illinois. As an American Republican, I'm not shocked, which is really embarrassing. Luckily, we know Jones's chances of actually winning are practically non-existent. The particular district that Jones is running in has elected Democrats to Congress 24 out of 25 times in the last 25 elections. So why would any Republican, let alone a sane one, yes, I think they still might exist, run when they know their chances of winning are slim to none? Well, it for sure wouldn't be a rational decision. You'd be losing a lot of money and wasting a lot of people's time to prove what? Some might see Jones's impending nomination as a freak misstep, but it's actually an unavoidable consequence allowed by the uninformed and the unbothered.
Okay, so there's an actual reason, because that was just prattling on about nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get straight to the point. This happened because more than 600 people signed Jones's petition to get his name on the ballot.
Did all of these people stand by Jones's belief it is doubtful.
Yeah.
A reporter for The Atlantic went out and talked to some of the people who signed the petition to see if they shared Jones's thoughts.
And then 63-year-old Linda Forlasky, a wiser of Legrand, told The Atlantic, I probably just signed it because he asked me to. How does that work?
What country is that surname from? Russia?
That's what I was thinking.
What are the chances of that?
Maybe she's a CIA.
CIA plan.
Can you just... You know what? I just pictured this guy fucking going around, just knocking on doors. Will you sign my form for me? And he just knocks on this door, and out answers this guy, full Jewish attire. And he's like, he doesn't even look at it. He just signs. He just signs his name
guy
down.
Just starts sweating. Surely you would ask, like, what's it for?
No, apparently not. Apparently these people just signed this fucking form.
To be fair, though, it could just be... The form probably would have just said, for me to run as Republican. And then they're going to say, like, tell me a bit about yourself. It's like, well, I deny the Holocaust.
Do you know...
You're not exactly going to lead with it, are you?
You know what? Maybe he bullshitted. You know what I picture him doing? I picture he turns up in, like, a fake FedEx van, and he gets out holding a package. He's like, sign here, please. And he just does that down the old street, and they don't realise what they're signing.
Inside the package, just forged Nazi documents. Photocopied.
It's the same one that he had in the video.
So, I mean, this guy doesn't stand a chance. I mean, he doesn't stand a chance, but he's running.
Never say never.
So,
let's have some money behind him, though.
It sounds like he's just bumblefucked his way through. It doesn't sound like he's...
Well, since no one else contested, no other Republican. It must
probably
just
be
because
it was just the most democratic area. They just thought, fuck
let's
it,
get
let
the
him
most
have a go.
conservative guy we can possibly find, a super Nazi, and we'll get him to run. He'll win us the state of Illinois.
Just sticking a nobody. They probably just thought, fuck it, no one's going to win whoever we put in there, so we may as well just let him have a go.
Use a throwaway card.
Just suddenly before we know it, the swastika flags come down again. Of Illinois. He said, I have hope that not all of the 600 people who willingly put their name on the ballot knew what they were signing up for. But even that offers very little comfort and definitely no sympathy. Did he say that, or? No, that's what the writer said. Okay. Yeah. Fuck it. Is there anything else to add with this story? Or because it's just prattling on the author at this point.
Oh, here we go. With that being said, Jones's impending nomination didn't happen simply because a few people forgot to do their homework. In truth, it happened because there were not enough Republicans willing to claim the party as their own, or maybe there weren't enough Republicans willing to sacrifice their ego to represent the voice of their party. Both options are simply unacceptable.
If you look at it that way, it's a bit of a it's just a bit of
it's a non-story.
Funny story.
Yeah.
It's a non-story if you look at that.
It is really.
It's sort of it's put up as something. It seems more than what it is, if you see what I mean. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's certainly it's not like he has a real chance. It's definitely a lower tier story at best. I wouldn't call it necessarily a non-story because he got in.
If anything, all he's doing is just hurting the Republican Party. They shouldn't let him run.
It wasn't like the Republicans were like, we stand by him. It's obvious they're doing it just because they don't want their candidates to waste a good candidate on a state they think they can't win anyway. But I think on the other hand, this is awful publicity, and they should have had some idea that this is not good. Doesn't obviously reflect well on them.
You know what? The source here, The Independent, I absolutely hate them. Just looking down now, there's a post. Other stories. Any broadcast, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, should come with a warning.
Oh my god.
So how long have we actually been recording for? We got, just out of curiosity,
an hour and 20 minutes.
An hour and 20. Well, we got 2 more, so I think that should tide us over. Yeah.
Let's go for them. Let's get some forward.
I don't feel as necessarily confident as this one. I think, Jake, you should lead this one more.
Yeah, 100%. Go on, Jacob.
You know this guy more than
I've been following him since day one. In September 2016 was when
he was born.
Since he was
born. Can you give us a run?
I'm still thinking of my Dr. Asperger. What an unlucky name.
I'll tell you. All right. Can you give us, Jay, basically a rundown of him, what he's about, for anyone who doesn't know, like me?
You don't know who he is? Well, let me tell you.
I know who he is.
Dr. Jordan Peterson's a clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology in Toronto. And he first rose to fame in September 2016 when he refused to address... he to quote him, he refused to bend to the will of radical leftists in their compelled speech of people having to abide by people's personal pronouns in Canada who are transgender.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he wasn't being transphobic. He was he was just simply saying, "I'm not going to speak the words that you speak. I'm not going to."
Well, yeah. To add to that, he said, it's one thing to say you can't say something, but to say you have to say something.
Yeah.
It's just dystopian.
Yeah. So that's the whole argument.
But he obviously respects trans students. He said if one politely come and asked him, he'd respect that student as an individual. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So anyway, let's get.
It's a principle.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get into it. Jordan Peterson has no idea what he's talking about, says Sam Harrison, who's a history undergraduate, who probably has as much right to say that as we do, to be perfectly honest. He's a psychologist, not a political philosopher, and no doubt he is a very good one, but it does grate a little to see him receive so much praise for spouting nonsense. This is rather late for a critique of Jordan Peterson, but we might apparently be witness to a debate between the eminent professor and Slavoj Zizek in October, which is proof that Peterson is going to... Who? Slavoj Zizek. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's a Eastern European philosopher. He speaks really well. Right. Which is proof that Peterson's going to be hanging around in the world of internet, if nothing else, for the foreseeable future. The prospective debate seems to be likely to be something of a damp squib because of all the criticisms people level at Zizek. There is no doubt whatever that he is a very erudite political philosopher, whereas Jordan Peterson most certainly is not. In fact, the slightest scrutiny of his comments reveals that he is totally out of his depth. Well, let's see if he has anything to back up that claim. He is managing to maintain his ascendancy solely through the mindless cheerleading of unintelligent conservative commentators. I'm offended. And a judicious mix of pathetically feeble and politically sympathetic interviewing, which has failed to interrogate any of the categories in which he found his worldview.
Politically sympathetic interviewing? How old's this article?
It's like 2 days.
Politically sympathetic interviewing.
What the hell? So they haven't seen the Kathy Newman interview then?
I know. 3 days old.
This is very...
24.
He's very confident in how this debate's going to go for one that hasn't even happened yet.
I know. He's an arrogant prick, whoever's wrote this. He's a loser.
All right, let's continue. I don't know. Obviously, I can't comment necessarily. I don't really watch either side of this. I may watch it if I get a link to it.
Well, it hasn't happened yet at all, and there's been no talk
when it happens.
Hopefully,
but
that'd be good.
But he seems very sure that this is going to be one-sided. He seems very confident. I think too confident.
Jordan Peterson's a genius.
Yeah,
I think he's too confident.
No way he's losing the debate.
What are these categories?
But go on.
First, liberalism. There is something that Peterson likes to talk about a lot, but as far as anyone can tell, his understanding of liberalism is based on a pop history of the Enlightenment in which the male individual, male being in speech mark, in quote marks, brackets even, armed with the light of objective reason, single-handedly sees off the tyranny of corporate society and establishes a free community of equals who may or may not have picked up an intentional empire somewhere down the line. Whenever Peterson talks about reason, it is with a capital R. See his example in this interview, in which he fetches reason in distinctly Enlightenment terms, and perhaps this is to do him an injustice, but it seems as he conceives of reason as a kind of objectively existing force whose power individual minds can access it if they think critically enough. That was poorly read.
So what he's saying is rather than trying to come to some objective reasonable truth, he'd rather people were just flinging shit at each other. Yeah. And just being totally self-absorbed in their own opinions.
He's completely denying the work of ancient philosophers who have established the groundwork of what our society is based on.
Isn't society its foundations based on objective reason. Like you and I, of course, we reason objectively that it's in our interests. Obviously, for example, not to steal. Isn't that so? What's he implying? As if objectively reasoning is a bad thing? Or what's his
anarchist? I actually have no idea. Like
just total ignorance.
He's putting claims forward and not backing them up, or just backing them up by saying things like
ignorance is the solution. Every time you talk, I'm just gonna tell you now, Tom. I'm just gonna say things like racist, imperialist. Just gonna edit. Just try it now. Go ahead. Just say any statement, any opinion. It's all right.
I enjoy peanut butter on toast.
Misogynistic.
Right. Oppression comes about in this...
How dare you censor me?
In this schema, when the individual...
You oppressive pigs.
What are you doing?
Go on, let him continue. Go on.
Yeah.
This is a race issue.
Oppression comes about in this schema when the individual gives up reason and resorts instead of to tribalism and from there violence and authoritarianism. He thus draws a...
You just hate me because I'm black.
God damn it. He thus draws a simplistic link between loss of respect in the individual and the totalitarian state. Let me think about that. Draws a simplistic line between the loss of respect for the individual and the totalitarian state. I mean, where
are you two here? Have you read this bit here? If the argument was when there is a spirit of reason available to all human beings, then it is also possible to create a society of pure harmony, since no rational being's interest will conflict with any others.
Oh, we gotta go back. You're ahead than us. Yeah. We're at the bit where it says oppression comes about in this schema when the individual gives up reason.
Apologise. Sorry, I did read ahead.
Yeah, we can go back to it in a bit.
Yeah.
But the points that Peterson draws to in totalitarian states is often the Soviet Union, and how there's just
China as well.
Yeah, and Maoist China, and how there's just such an inconsistency with how we have no idea how many people died. It just is resonant of such chaos that there was in those states. There's no recollection of whether it was 50 million or 100 million. That's a big gap.
Having looked at, for example, like Mao Zedong with China, briefly with Russia, the unprecedented scale of starvation and death and oppression, I'm convinced it's probably just, it's definitely a level of evil. I would say definitely a level of evil. I would argue it was, if not just as evil, just slightly below the power of Nazism. I'm talking about the hard communist regimes. I definitely consider them, there's an evilness, insidious nature to them, filled with hypocrisy.
It's the fact they hide behind more of a veil than the Nazis as well.
I myself, I'm not obviously capitalism unrestrained, I think, is not a good thing if it has no restrictions. But in the same way, I think obviously totalitarianism and I think communism itself, they're also
nothing's perfect, though, is it?
I think of myself as a socialist capitalist. I think that works quite nicely. I think
for me, it's not about it's more about what's fair.
Yeah. I think just
then people's interpretations of fair are going to be different.
But yeah, I don't see why. I mean, you can't argue if you look at some of these states. Reason was essentially thrown to the wind. These things were chaotic. Mao Zedong in China, he did loads of schemes that were ill-fated. Like one included, they wanted to kill all these sparrow birds, right? So they launched a massive campaign to just kill the sparrows. They're so short-sighted to just kill the sparrows. So what happens? The pesticides, the things that the sparrows eat, the pests, I can't think what it is, they multiply, and then they have another problem.
The pesticides multiply?
No, oh God, I'm trying to think what it, not pesticides.
Production of pesticide just went through the roof.
The basically what happened was I can't think exactly, but their prey essentially obviously multiplied massively because they'd lost their main hunter.
And toppled Mao's regime.
Genius.
Well,
it created
it definitely caused problems because it helped lead to the mass starvation.
Yeah.
Which always seems to be a common problem with these communist things, starvation.
I like how, and I've seen the argument loads of times, how people will say, "Oh yeah, but capitalism's killed more, but we just don't know the figure." Like, how is that possible? How has capitalism killed people? Capitalism is an economic model.
War is exclusive to capitalism.
Not a way of life.
I mean, that in itself, capitalism's evolved a lot. Communism's in its form, it's
communism is a pure way of life, whereas capitalism is just an economic model. So,
and it's how people live anyway.
You don't die due to capitalism. You die due to poor choices, or maybe you got unlucky. I understand that, but you can't compare the two.
I think obviously unrestrained capitalism, I think, is a bad thing. Mind, I will say, I condemn communism, but to allow corporations.
But it's not evil, though, is it? Yeah, but corporationism and capitalism is different. I mean, I would say corporationism is restricted capitalism.
Anything, I think, that's totally unrestrained. I mean, I don't say it in the term of like it's evil in a literal sense. I mean it that it's negative. I think of it as I think it's negative to allow total non-restraint when it comes to the administrations of your economy and your government, and I feel like you need to have some balance, I think. But anyway, we're going off a bit now. We need to get back to this genius and Jordan Peterson and all that.
Okay. This link is, by his own claim, basing back to the link between individual loss and totalitarian state, based on his close reading of 20th century is based off of 20th century history. If this is the conclusion that he has come to, we can only surmise that he is potentially unable to read. The totalitarian mindset, as thinkers have from across the political spectrum, from Albert Camus to Isaiah Berlin, have noted, is precisely a product of the Enlightenment rationalism that Peterson so admires. If the argument went, there is a spirit of reason available to all human beings, then it is also possible to create a society of pure harmony, since no rational being's interests will conflict with any others. Only in such a society is the individual free. This is the vision that motivates totalitarianism. The individual is a creature that is currently unfree because it is bound by its prejudices and other social conditioning. One can draw parallels between this mindset and social justice activism of a certain kind, which undoubtedly understands that the individual is an entity shackled by socially created presuppositions which it is necessary to break through control. However, it is not in fact a vision that is totally unlike Peterson's understanding of his detractors and his proposal that people discipline themselves to get rid of the more socially harmful attributes. Peterson is obviously committed to the ideal of value pluralism, and it would be deeply unfair of him to imply otherwise. In this respect, he is a true liberal. By his own metric, his opponents too are true liberals. To ascribe totalitarianism and the modern social justice movement to an impulse to worship the collective, no matter how much the individual suffers, is a misdiagnosis catastrophically both on this phenomenon. I've been following him for ages, and
he seems
right. I think Peterson is 100% right.
What is? Okay, so I mean, he's stringing together a lot of things here. Okay, so he's trying to argue that if there's a spirit of reason available to all human beings, then it's also possible to create a society of pure harmony, since no rational being's interests will conflict with any other. I mean, the individual as a person has their own rationality that they're going to come up with. It's okay. I'm not even sure what to totally add on all this.
I did like that. It was a mess, that was.
Maybe it's just my reading.
Yeah, this is.
He was making a point going on his own assumptions in the first place.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
But the idea that social justice and totalitarianism are not linked together, I think, is wrong, because
it's quite a stretch, I think, arguing like because of this objective enlightenment, that's the main sort of thing for totalitarianism.
Yeah,
I think
social justice.
But social justice is used to control.
Yeah,
and it is. And it is collectivist.
For example, objective reasoning. The Nazis, for example, did not use objective reasoning when it came to the loss of World War One. They totally distorted, lied, bullshitted the truth about their position and how they thought they could continue to fight the war, despite all evidence to the contrary. They ignored many of the objective truths. Totalitarianism is built on deceit, paranoia, fear. I don't think it's built on reason. I've never seen a regime of totalitarianism built on, objective truths.
Here's something else interesting about Nazis, right? So once they realized that they were losing World War II and there was no coming back for it, instead of utilizing the Jews as a means to an end to build more weapon shells for tanks, for guns, instead of that, they just upped the ante and increased the kill ratio and upped the number of Jews that were being killed.
Yeah, that's not very objective.
No.
Or is it rational? The regime was very ruled on chaos. If you actually look at the cabinet, the members, the generals were often fighting each other. I'd have to disagree that this idea that rationality is what motivates. I don't. How is it described again? Objective rationalism is what fuels totalitarianism. There's not really, if you look deep into these things, they're built on miscommunications, they're built on fear, paranoia, smoke screens. The truth with totalitarianism is often hard to find, the objective truth, because it's usually hidden behind so much propaganda.
Yeah.
But anyway, do you want to continue with this? Because he goes on.
Yeah. Social justice activists of the kind he despises in truth embrace the individual as much as he does, and simplify their proposals to a group mentality is to fuel exactly the kind of political misrepresentation. I can't agree with that. I'm sorry.
How can he say that?
I know. Which social justice literally defines people by their group identity. And if you're black, then you must be here in the hierarchy. If you're white, then you must.
So this guy works for Huffington Post, and he doesn't think social justice.
I don't think he works. I don't think he works for Huffington
Wait,
Post.
Where's the?
But yeah, go on.
Where's the line?
Say again.
Oh, where's the line? Because I've lost where I'm at.
It was the end of the second paragraph, I think. Social justice activists of the kind he despises in truth embrace the individual.
But either way, he's bound to have read articles about it. Like he's making his own conclusions of social justice that simply aren't true.
Yeah.
The amount of articles have aimed at so-called white men as if we're all one single entity thinking the exact same thing.
Body. And that's where the alt-right fills the gap, It's where they have to. They have to play.
The alt-right and its growth is inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, especially when they.
But it's fueled. It's fueled by
exactly.
it. They fuel each other so much.
It's both same.
If anything, Richard Spencer's ego is going to go up when he sees collectivism and ridiculous.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of discourses, equally impoverished is his understanding of postmodernism. Here we go. It's evident when he speaks about it. Here, for example, that he has got no further down his postmodernist reason list than Jacques Derrida's Wikipedia page.
Does anyone really understand postmodernism? Because it's such an elusive, vague, nebulous thing, I think, at this point. This is postmodernist. This is, the themes. All it basically is this discussion of existentiality, and it's a discussion on, it emerged out of the post-war era under the threat of, nuclear annihilation in the Cold War, and, at any moment you can die, and does life matter, and yada, yada, yada.
And that kind of feeds into the whole idea of the philosophy behind it, is that there is no objective reason, and everything is subjective. There's no objective truth.
I mean, my opinion on it is that does this guy? I mean, what do you all think? What do you all think? Yeah, just go for
that. There's going to be very few times where I'm going to be siding with anyone over Dr. Peterson.
This guy's massively ideological, and he won't admit to it. It's like speaking as if everything he's saying is objective fact.
He claims
the irony, exactly. That's what.
Yeah. He seems to believe that postmodernism is no more than a mask placed roughly over Marxism. He makes vague and unsophisticated reference to not power, knowledge. He claims to have read Foucault, but this is not much in evidence, and extrapolates the concept of tribalism once again, claiming that it discourages people from engaging in debate. This is flat.
I'd agree with that. Tribalistic approaches and not taking an objective, as he would call it, look at the world, or at least an open-minded look. If you are just bogged down with dogmatic tribal thinking, you're not going to engage the debate in a realistic way. No, you're going to just go in with a closed-minded, the team mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've read some of Foucault, and from what I always understood of Foucault, he was somebody who was about being provocative historically. He didn't care necessarily that his historical facts were sometimes inaccurate. He was trying to make a point. And I think, Foucault is someone who was always interested in having the debate. He wasn't someone who he certainly isn't someone who had, I think, tribalistic thinking. He's someone who did sort of embody, or at least he was an interesting figure, I think. But let's continue anyway, unless you want to. How much do you want to continue with this, or do you want to head over in a minute?
I'm happy to continue.
Okay.
So he thinks, in reference to the idea that Marxism and postmodernism are kind of, one and the same. So postmodernism is almost an update on Marxism, because it's just the ideological progression of the narrative, right? It's just Marxism didn't work when we looked at people based on their class, so now let's look at people based on their race and their gender, etc., etc. It's just the logical conclusion that is made once one argument is evaporated and it's done. Then we just move on to the next one. He thinks that's flatly incorrect, not merely because that conclusion is in no way implied by the theory, but also because social justice activists talk constantly about the importance of engaging with the oppressor precisely in order to make them understand the sources of their privilege. There are criticisms to be made of the use of the concept. Go on. Something to say?
Talk constantly because social justice activists talk constantly about the importance of engaging with the oppressed. I mean, here we go again.
It's just if you're white and you're at the top of this sociological hierarchy that we have in our brains, then you must be evil, and therefore we are justified in targeting you for X reason or Y reason.
The oppressors. Who are these anonymous oppressors? What a cute term, innit? The oppressors. You oppress me. You oppress me. No, you do.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff they make about oppressors is little more than people who are more economically advantaged.
Yeah. This actually boils down, ironically, to something that Peterson said about George Orwell when he was reading Road to Wigan Pier, I think it was called. George Orwell came to the conclusion, being a socialist himself, that socialists don't necessarily have a love for the working class. They simply have a hatred for the rich and for anyone richer than them. Which I think, not to blanket every single socialist, because I'm sure that there are some that actually, want to do well by people, but that I think is extremely common within socialist thinking. It's just a byproduct.
Of people we know, we can easily tell that.
Yeah.
I mean, most
socialists I know are middle class.
As a socialist capitalist myself, I hold the opinion that I have no issue with anyone who earns or is financially more well off or was born into money. Obviously, oops. You guys still there?
Yep.
We're still here.
Yeah. I have no issue with anyone like that, obviously. I obviously, though, think that In workplace environments, there should just be a decent standard, and I think everyone has rights to certain decent standards of living. I think in a modern society, they get those rights. But I have no issue with anyone.
What do you mean by that?
Decent standards of living. What do I mean? Like if they go into the workplace, I think it is
only in the workplace.
No, I mean like it as in some broader pictures like society. I think you have the right not to be sexually assaulted. Is like an example, and things like I think you have the just I think basic rights. I think, and you have, obviously
that's not a socialist thing though.
I mean that's a socialist attitude. I think it's obviously quite it's not a major issue anymore. But I think other smaller
quite
things.
Non-partisan.
Yeah, I think other issues is I think you have the right to earn a decent wage, at least a livable wage. I would say. I think you have the right that in a job you should.
I don't believe in a minimum wage.
I think you should have a livable wage. I think you should have a wage. In a basic job. I'm not saying you should have luxuries non-stop luxuries in your life, but I think you should have enough. If you work a basic job, if you're not capable of working these higher end jobs, obviously, you should still have enough to get by and live a decent life. I think. That's my opinion. By
decent? That's so subjective.
Decent, as in you're able to afford food. Decent, as in you're able to get a roof over your head. Maybe not a house, maybe just an apartment, but enough.
Yeah.
Just enough for, as the Americans would put it, rugged individualism. Enough for at least some self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
I would say. But that's my sort of opinions. I don't know hostility towards someone who. The only time I have hostility towards someone is if they abuse their position. I think if they abuse.
I'm not. Obviously, I don't think anyone of us are in favour of that, but it's just that kind of gets categorised. I think by socialists as anyone who's richer is automatically morally inferior because the fact that they have attained wealth somehow must imply that they've done something wrong or misdone something.
When I say obviously moral, morally infringing, I mean obviously like people who are, they work out ways to exploit the workers, to like cut their wages in a way that's obviously not ethical or in any way. If it's just a pursuit of profit for the sake of profit, or things like illegally dumping chemicals into seas, just because they don't want to pay to have it properly removed. Yeah. I think things like that.
Let's go. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Shall we? Like half.
And how long do we have left?
Of this article.
Yeah, no, we want to keep it around the 2-hour mark, don't we?
Yeah, I say we move on. This article is boring. Okay. This guy knows what he's on about.
Yeah, it's a bit dry, I think.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. A snobbish attempt to query Peterson's intelligence.
We could have found a better criticism of Peterson.
Yeah,
it's awful. I guarantee. I bet you any money this guy's middle class.
He's a university
it's not even.
Student.
I
guarantee. He's a history undergraduate.
Well, he's a university student. Yeah.
Besides, I gotta be honest. I don't feel because I don't know Peterson. I haven't listened to him as much, so obviously I don't feel that I can add much more to this chat. I feel what I've added has been sufficient enough, but I feel like any more I'm just gonna give shitty commentary.
Fair enough.
So I want to move on to something a bit more fun.
Okay, we have
which we
one
got.
Final.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Final hoorah.
The final. Let's go. Are you ready?
Okay. Hitler planned Nazi Death Star that could melt people and turn cities into ash. Fact.
You know what no one ever talks about with Hitler? That he was obviously a CIA plant.
He takes the mask off. It's Hillary Clinton.
Nazi leader Adolf Hitler planned to create a sun gun that could fry his hated enemies. It has been revealed.
Wait a minute. Why are you pronouncing Adolf as Adolf?
Oh, here we go again. Adolf.
You can't call him Adolf. You're not American.
Adolf Hitler.
Okay. Oh.
Fascist.
Do you want to
do you want to read it? So, seeing as how I'll keep on saying Adolf.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Fascist.
May I read?
Oh yeah.
I haven't read one yet, so. Fascist boffins tried to develop the high-tech satellite that would reflect the sun's rays to burn targets on Earth. If it became operational, it would act in a similar way to the infamous Death Star from the Star Wars movie franchise. US soldiers made the incredible discovery when they raided Nazi strategy centers during the dying days of World War II. The plans later emerged in a magazine, published in 1945, which was titled Nazi. Men of Science seriously planned to use a man-made satellite as a weapon for conquest, which is a mouthful for a magazine title.
Yeah. You know what?
Catchy, that one.
You know what? I actually think though. Yeah, I mean, do you think it's bollocks? Because I've got to say.
I mean, the Death Star used kyber crystals anyway, not the sun.
Well, it was based Star Wars.
As if that affects the legitimacy of this article. Oh, the Emperor didn't do it like that. I'll have the
Star Wars.
That's my only problem with this article.
Star Wars.
Star Wars, not the Nazis.
Was actually based on Nazis. The Nazis and the Empire was based on. And the Nazis themselves, they did some crazy fucking experiments. I'm not going to lie. Some of these experiments have included, and I do know, they tried to find the lost city of Atlantis to prove Aryans came from there.
Genius.
And linked to some... They spent money on this. They spent money, or what else? There was other things they tried. The occult. Hitler was obsessed with the occult.
Guys, scroll down. When you scroll down the article, can you see where it says Nazi leader Hermann Goering's personal photo album from World War II? And it's like Hitler smiling at a baby. Carry on, Connor. Sorry.
Yeah, the experiments of the Nazi regime were basically, obviously there's the horrific ones with such as the Jewish people, the stitching of twins together.
Mengele in it,
yeah, Dr. Mengele, the Doctor of Death. But you just see weird things. Like they wanted to make super tanks. They wanted to make super soldiers. There was experiments into that. Mainly experiments with super soldiers with the Japanese forces, actually. But I know they wanted to develop the greatest tank, the best submarine, super this, and it's all crazy. A lot of it, the occult stuff. Hitler was obsessed with trying to find immortality. And that was one thing he wanted as well. So is it really surprising that he'd want to build a Death Star?
Yeah.
Based on a movie that came out in 1977.
He's been to the future.
You just picture this fucking scientist. Can you not just picture the meeting? It's the dying days of World War II. This fucking scientist runs it. Mein Führer, I have the answer. I have been in contact with this friend of mine, George Lucas. He is one of us. Don't worry about it. Oh. I wonder how that conversation went.
He must have just been sat around a table. He's like, I've got it. I finally got it. The war's won. The war's won. We use the sun. They'll just die.
Or do you think, as it was the dying days, do you think he was just like, well, fuck it, fund it.
Do it. Let's go for it. We're all in there.
What's the worst that can happen?
Mexico paid for it.
No, it'd be the Jews who pay for it back then, man. It'd be the Jews. We have to be appropriate to the time. He sends a bill to Israel.
There was no Israel at the time, I don't think, was there?
No, 1946. So.
Anyway, continue reading. Please.
Oh shit, it's me in it. Yeah. Put the article down, to be honest, boys.
Oh, all right, I'll pick it up.
Hang on. It's because I'm looking at these bloody personal photos of Hitler. Where is it now? Where was I?
German researchers believe they would be able to harness the sun's energy to melt US cities, including Pittsburgh. Seems sound strategy. Plans for the mega weapon were put on hold. However, when Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the magazine article later claimed it would be difficult for the Nazis to carry out their fiendish plan as they did not have a powerful enough rocket to send the parts into space. It added...
You know what?
Go on.
I just got a thought. You know what would be perfect? Do you want it to be perfect? If, like, Hitler sketched out this little suit and he was like, make me this, and it was like the Darth Vader suit. Maybe that's what happened.
The only reason the Nazis couldn't use the sun's energy to melt Pittsburgh was because they didn't have a more powerful enough rocket.
That was the only thing in their way. Not to mention all of the science behind it.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's where Hitler really went. Maybe that's we've cracked it. Maybe he was just Darth Vader in the suit in the whole film, and we didn't know.
That sounds realistic. It added whether the sun gun would have accomplished what they expected. However, that is another matter. Evil. Hitler ruled Germany with an iron fist.
Thanks for that, bro.
More pictures of Goering.
They haven't gone into the technology used. Maybe it's just like a massive magnifying glass.
I'll tell you one of the secret experiments. It's funny you say that. There's two things.
That would work, wouldn't it?
It was used in warfare, a giant magnifying glass in ancient Greece against the Roman Empire.
Archimedes, wasn't it?
Archimedes, used a giant magnifying glass to reflect the sun.
Off of the coast of Syracuse, I think.
Yep, he did.
Yeah. Look at us knowing our history.
And the other thing is, there was one other secret project of the Nazis that to this day is still used, actually. Jets. They developed the first jets, but they did it so late the war ended, and they never got to see any real use.
Do you think...
But for the V2 rocket was miles ahead of its time, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, NASA basically hired all of the Nazi scientists, loads of them after. They snapped them up because they had to beat the Ruskies in the space race.
Yeah.
But,
do you think they should have waited a few years, the Nazis, before they invaded Poland, until they, even more capable, and adept with all the technology, etc.
It's interesting.
You shouldn't have invaded Russia.
Yeah, that's the general's major mistake. Napoleon did it. Stupid.
I mean, they shouldn't have been. I mean, ethically, they shouldn't have invaded anyone, but militarily speaking, put
that aside for a moment.
Militarily,
put ethics aside,
Operation Barbarossa. It was a train wreck. Basically, the problem was with Hitler is that there's some debate whether he was a good military commander or not. Hitler, with France, approved the plan that allowed them to defeat it in about 2 weeks because he liked the unconventional method, and the French were still expecting World War I trench warfare. But after that success, he grew massively overconfident in his military capabilities. Yeah. And once the battle for Britain was lost and Operation Sea Lion to invade Britain was delayed, Hitler was so impulsive and so, I think, unable to long-term deal with, warfare mentality. His attitude...
With everything. Long-term couldn't deal with anything. Yeah, even economic problems. It was all just from... such short-term things.
Yeah, he basically...
Obviously, expanding is good for the economy. You just take the resource from the countries.
Because the minute he lost with Britain, instead of digging his heels in to continue the fight, he was like, "Fuck it, we'll try fight the Russians, or we'll try fight these lot." And his strategy, was just a continuation. Obviously, that type of short, unable to deal with long term is just going to build you a network of enemies if you don't take them out one at a time. And that came back to bite Hitler in the ass, obviously, with the Russians pushing back from the east. And then you had the Western allies of America and Britain. He just impulsively, he could have delayed it. He impulsively, when Japan went to war with America, he impulsively said, "Yeah, we're in the war against America now as well."
Yeah.
Instead of possibly trying to delay that, or
once America joined, there was no way they were going to lose.
No, not by that. Allies. I mean, by that point as well, the Japanese war machine and the Nazi war machine were slowing down a lot anyway. So by the time America joined the war, it was basically just the death blow to an already failing war.
Yeah.
But yeah, how much more time do we have? Because I think we're
kind of covering 2 hours now.
Yeah, we've gone into 2 hours, have we?
Close enough.
We are at, I'll tell you now, 2 hours and 1 minute.
Well, all right. We may.
That's since the Skype call started, not since the recording. So I'd say about 1 hour and 50.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. Hitler's mentality was too short-sighted, too short-termed. It failed to deal with the type of warfare he was fighting. Needed a real thought process that I think he was incapable of. For example, like the Italian war machine, they spent all their money, much of their budget, on luxury living quarters for officers and just corruption and flattery things for Mussolini. Their air force was in tatters. They had no heavy vehicles.
They had a decent navy.
I think they had a decent navy, but that was about it. And the issue is that they begged Hitler, please give us a few years to be able to prepare our army fully for the type of conflict you want. But Hitler said no. And he just immediately went into Poland. He actually didn't think, because he invaded the Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria with no real repercussions. And he thought Britain would not declare war. He just thought no one had the stomach. The minute the war was declared, apparently he flew into a real rage because he was that convinced. Again, that shows, I think, his real short-sightedness and naivety, that he thinks that, he can continue to push and expect no clash back. But I think that was, again, one of the many fatal flaws of his government, him, the regime, why he lost the war. And yeah, I mean, I've studied the topic of Hitler and the Nazi regime pretty rigorously by this point, I'd say.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I'm definitely more qualified to talk on this than Jordan Peterson.
Need to change that.
I was just like, just bumblefucking my way through that. Modernism.
Yeah, I'd highly advise listening to Jordan Peterson.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I can make the special needs voice. You guys can't, because that would be racist. I can do it because I have Asperger's, and that gives me a free pass.
Thank you, Dr.
That's
Asperger.
Right.
Dr. Asperger, terrible name. Why don't you just change your surname?
After we found out what Asperger's was. The connotation.
Oh, guys, look at it. Hang on. One more point.
Yeah.
One more point. Putting a link now in the chat. If you'd like to click on that link.
Give me a second to set it up so people can watch as well.
3 of those views are actually me.
You're the one like.
Someone's actually commented saying that was some good beer. It must be the feature on the video.
I don't know, that must be a dead. They didn't seem to have any other videos linked.
No, they have one more video.
Oh,
he starts off by thanking everyone for subscribing, but he has 1 subscriber. It's obviously him.
It's alright. Oh, Jesus.
Thank you so much for subscribing to my page.
Yeah, he has 1 subscriber. That's really awkward.
We're gonna get
he's making a video to thank one man.
We're gonna get
That's dedication to his fan base.
We're gonna get sued.
We're gonna get a lawsuit sent to our door. Oh. All right.
Anyway, next week we're gonna review some fruity ales.
Would you say now, all in favor of, as we discussed, like a history of the horror?
I'd like to do, how about horror and abortion?
Those things go hand in hand.
No, but it'd be a nice split. It'd be a nice split. Yeah.
An hour debate on abortion and an hour.
Yeah, cool.
And an hour discussion on the history of horror.
Okay.
That
sounds good to me.
Maybe I think that we'll all have to maybe pick our favorite horror films, and then we have to.
Cool. Well, you two are more well versed in the realm of horror than I am.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm sure you can help, contribute in the second half.
Yeah,
you can
I'll
definitely
come in helpful somewhere. I'm sure, even if it's just moral.
Yeah, it's okay. You can be like I was with Peter back there. Peter, what was it?
You don't know
Jordan
his name.
Peterson. Peter Jordan. I forgot his name.
I was like
Professor Peter Jordan. You'd be like me and just sort of pretend you know what you're talking about.
That's me through life anyway.
I got one more question.
Okay, go for it.
When we dropping, boys?
Looks like you two.
Yeah, come on, let's get on Fortnite, man. I'm ready to rank up now. New season.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for listening to the show. We hope you tune in next time. And we are out of here.
Thanks for listening. Au revoir.
Bye.